We're starting a new section now. We finished talking about the harf. The author says, Asl, original text. وَالْكَلَامُ لَفْظٌ مُفِيدٌ. Speech is an informative expression. Speech is an informative expression. So firstly, when he says al-kalam, he means kalam according to the grammarians. The word kalam, which translates as speech. And I'm just going to say speech, or I'll say kalam. And it means very specifically what we're talking about here. Wal-kalamu lafdhun mufid. Lafdhun mufid. It is an utterance that promotes benefit. Here it means it's informative. It leaves you with something. Ash-sharhu, the explanation. لما أنهيت القول في الكلمة. When I finished speaking about the kalima, the word, the single word, وأقسامها الثلاثة, and its three divisions, the nominal and the verb and the particle. شرعت في تفسير الكلام. I commenced to explain what speech means. فذكرت أنه عبارة عن اللفظ المفيد. And so I mentioned that it is an expression of an informative utterance. Yani, it is an expression of means. Speech refers to an informative utterance or an informative pronunciation. وَنَعْنِي بِاللَّفْظِ, and what we mean by lafz, pronunciation or utterance, الصوت المشتمل على بعض الحروف, the sound that is comprised of some letters, يعني, from some articulating spots in the mouth. أو ما هو في قوة ذلك, or what is of that strength. What has the strength of that? What has the strength of that? فالأول نحو رجل وفرس. So the first is like rajul, man. So it's made from letters when you say it. Rajul, we're talking about saying it, not seeing it written on a page. And faras, horse. Wathani, the second, كالضمير المستتر في نحو اضرب واذهب, is like the veiled pronoun when saying the likes of strike or go. المقدر بقولك أنت. What's implied is that you are saying you. And what he means is that implication is so strong that it's counted, even though you didn't say it. وَنَعْنِي بِالْمُفِيدِ, and we mean by informative مَا يَصِحُّ الِاكْتِفَاءُ بِهِ, that which is sufficiently sufficed with. Yani, that which is validly sufficed with, validly, that which is enough to suffice with it. فَنَحْوُ قَامَ زَيْدٌ كَلَامٌ. Therefore, the likes of قَامَ Zayd, Zayd stood, is speech. لأنه لفظ يصح الاكتفاء به, because that composition is an utterance that it's enough to say it and stop there and suffice with that. Yani, to put a meaning across to the one who's listening to you. That's what they call in English, conveys a complete thought. وإذا كتبت زيد قائم مثلا فليس بكلام. And if you were to write Zaydun Qa'im, for example, then this is not speech. لأنه, because وإن صح الاكتفاء به الاكتفاء وإن صح الاكتفاء به, even though it's enough to suffice with that, لكنه ليس بلفظ. However, it's not a pronunciation. وكذلك إذا أشرت إلى أحد بالقيام أو القعود. And likewise, if you signaled or gestured to someone to stand or to sit, فليس بكلام, that's not speech. لأنه ليس بلفظ, because it's not an utterance. ونحو زيد ليس بكلام لأنه لفظ لا يصح الاكتفاء به. And the expression Zayd, merely Zayd, that's a man's name, that's not speech, because it's not a pronunciation. And because it's not a pronunciation that is valid to suffice with. It's not a pronunciation, if you were to pronounce it, that's valid to suffice with. Because it's not informative to just say Zayd. So, you know that linguistically, in a broader sense, not specifically in this technical sense, these examples he gave, they are speech because they gave a meaning. So in the technical sense of this field of Nahu, it's not speech, either because it wasn't informative or because it wasn't pronounced. That's what we're going to call speech. Asl, original text. وَأَقَلُّ ائْتِلَافِهِ مِنْ اثْنَيْنِ. Its minimum composition is two nominals. كَزَيْدٌ قَائِمٌ, like Zayd Qa'im, Zaydun Qa'im. So Zayd, that's a nominal. That's a man's name. That's a ism alam, proper noun. Qa'im, that's a nominal. That's a sifa, an adjective. So that's why I'm choosing to say nominal, because an adjective is a noun, if I want to use the word noun here. But just so that I don't mix too many things up, I'm using a different word. So it's a nominal. The nouns are nominals and the adjectives are nominals. It's not a verb. And that's a complete sentence. So Arabic language can do what English language can't do here, which is to make a sentence without a verb. When you translate that into English, you need to put a verb, because you can't make a proper English sentence without a verb. You can make an improper sentence without a verb, like how people talk in slang. Like, who that? Or who that? Who he? So that's clearly understood to people who speak slang, right? Especially if you have the right accent when you say it. Who he, for example. But I was trying there. So, but that's not a correct sentence in English. So its minimum composition is two nominals. Kazaydun qa'im, like Zaydun qa'im. Zayd is standing. Or very more literally, Zayd is a stander. One who stands. Oh, fi'lin wasm. Or it could be composed of a verb and a nominal. Kaqama Zayd. Kaqama Zayd, like Zayd stood. So that's a verb and a nominal. Ash-sharh, the explanation. Suwaru ta'lif al-kalami sit. The scenarios of speech composition are 6. وذلك لأنه يتألف إما من اثنين إما من اسمين. And that's because speech would be composed either of two nominals, أو من فعل واسم, or of a verb and a nominal, أو من جملتين, or of two sentences or two clauses, if you want to try to match that to English grammar, or two clauses, أو من فعل واسمين, or of a verb and two nominals. That means here you have one verb and two nominals. Without both of those, you're not putting a meaning across. It's not mufid. أو من فعل وثلاثة أسماء, or of a verb and three nominals. أو من فعل وأربعة أسماء, or of a verb and four nominals. So in the text, he said the minimum composition of speech is two nominals or a verb and a nominal. And then in the explanation, he gave more details. So just from the text alone, you might not know that there's 6 scenarios for composing speech in Arabic. You might think there's 2. Jumla ismiya, nominal sentence, and jumla fi'liya, verbal sentence. And then just like that. Now it's true, those are your 2 sentence types, but they have scenarios. So when you break down all the scenarios, you come to 6 scenarios of how to structure a sentence in Arabic. أما ائتلافه من اسمين. Now, concerning its being composed of 2 nominals, فله أربع صور. That has 4 scenarios. إحداها أن يكون مبتدأ وخبرا. The first of them is that those 2 nominals would be an initiated subject, a nominal subject, or a started subject, and informing predicate. Mubtada means started. Khabar means news or information. Mubtada here means subject. Khabar means predicate. But not according to English standards, of course. It's a different language. We're going to call mubtada nominal subject, nominal subject. And we're going to call khabar nominal predicate, because these two form a nominal sentence, jumla ismiya, or nounal sentence, one might say. Nahu, for example, Zaydun qa'im. Zaydun qa'im. Zayd is a stander, but is a, that's in parentheses. Zayd is a stander. Zaydun qa'im. الثانية أن يكون مبتدأ وفاعلا سد مسد الخبر. The second scenario of a sentence without a verb, it's made of two nominals, is the case of having a sentence with two subjects, the second of which fills the space of the predicate. مبتدأ وفاعلا سد مسد الخبر. Now this mas'ala here, you don't have to focus here. And I'm going to, though, try to clarify it for you very well. Because this case, one might say that's an advanced case. But it's not really an advanced case. But you might not see it a lot. And I don't think it's in Al-Ajurumiyya, as I remember. So if you learned Ajurumiyya, then you might not get this mas'ala here. So this is مبتدأ وفاعل سد مسد الخبر. مبتدأ وفاعل سد مسد الخبر. نحو, for example, أقائم الزيدان. أقائم الزيدان. What's going on here? So here, this hamza, that's for asking. That's a question here. Qa'im, stander. Stander, that's ism, you know that now. And this ism here, that's the subject of the sentence. So a subject needs a predicate to be speech. So then there came this word az-zaydan, the two Zaids. Aqa'imun az-zaydan. Az-zaydan. So the sentence means, are the two Zaids standing? Can't really, there's nothing in English that can do this. Are the two Zaids standing? Aqa'imun az-zaydan. So this word az-zaydan, it's not a khabar. Rather, it's a verbal subject. Verbal subject. Where's the verb? There's no verb here for that to be a verbal subject. It's bouncing off of this word qa'im. Even though it's not a verb, though. It's treating that word qa'im like a verb, and it's not a verb. It's a nominal, but since it's an adjective, it has the meaning of a verb because he's standing, right? So if he's standing, there's an action going on, but that's not a verb. That's a description. But it has the meaning of a verb, and so then Zaydani came and treated it like a verb, and then just took a subject of a sentence as a predicate, basically. It's like this, as Zaydan came and said, oh, you're a subject here? You want a predicate? Well, you're going to be acting like my predicate now. And I'm going to be here, the subject. I'll just fill the space of your predicate here. Now, that might not have been very crystal clear. It's going to come back in its own chapter, inshallah, or at its own spot. It's not meant here to stop and go into detail. What's meant here is just to show you the scenarios of sentences. So you might not completely understand what I just said now. What should you go away with here as we move on? That in this sentence, there's a nominal subject, it's not a verb, and there's a verbal subject, it's not a true predicate. It's not a true predicate, but it's acting like a predicate. It's filling the space of a predicate. That's the meaning of sadda masadda al-khabar, fills the space of the predicate. You said here with L and without L is the same, or we must put L. Here, let's not stop here. Inshallah. There's some conditions for this structure to be valid. And I don't want to now think about them or go too hard here. Continuing to explain here, though, he says, وَإِنَّمَا جَازَ ذَلِكَ. Merely, what makes that valid? What makes it valid to have a subject, a nominal subject, basically acting like a predicate, and a verbal subject, basically also acting like a predicate? How's that? لِأَنَّهُ فِي قُوَّةِ قَوْلِكَ أَيَقُومُ زَيْدَانِ. Because it is as strong as saying, what he means is, it is equivalent to saying, it is tantamount to saying, أَيَقُومُ زَيْدَانِ. Are the two Zaids standing? This is clearer. If you understand some basic Arabic, that's a clear sentence. It's not going to confuse you. Here, Hamza, that's for asking. Here, yaqumu, that's your verb. Stands. And as Zaidan, that's your subject, your verbal subject, because you have a verb. Verbal subject, not nominal subject, verbal subject. When we say nominal subject, means it has a predicate that's a nominal. The subject's always going to be a nominal. The subject itself is always going to be an ism. But in Arabic, you can have a sentence where the predicate is also an ism. And you can have a sentence where the predicate is a fi'l, a verb. In English, there's always going to be a verb there. So if it's going to be, if there's a verb there, that means the subject of this sentence is a verbal. We're going to call it a verbal subject. And the verb is the predicate. Yani it's the verbal predicate or simply the predicate. It's a verb. If the subject, if the predicate of the sentence is a nominal, then we're going to call the subject a nominal subject. We're going to call the predicate a nominal predicate. Or we're going to say it in Arabic, mubtada and khabar. You should be getting used to those words. Don't let the translation cripple you. Just let the translation help you. This is this is a cheat sheet for you here. Otherwise, a book of this rank, you're supposed to be learning it in Arabic in the first place. So this sentence is clear if you understand a little bit of Arabic. Ayakumu Zaidan. There, Hamza is for asking. Yakumu is the verb. As Zaidan, the two Zaids, that's the subject of the sentence. Are the two Zaids standing? So when you said Aqa'imun is Zaidan, it means Ayakumu Zaidan. But qa'im is not a verb, it's a nominal. وَذَلِكَ كَلَامٌ تَامٌ. And that, أَيَقُومُ زَيْدَانِ, that's complete speech. Or what they would call a complete thought. لَا حَاجَةَ لَهُ إِلَى شَيْءٍ. This sentence doesn't need anything more. It's complete by itself. Doesn't need anything. This composition doesn't need more to be informative. فَكَذَلِكَ هَذَا. And likewise, our original example here, أَقَائِمٌ الزَّيْدَانِ, that's a complete sentence. It's just unfamiliar to the small fries, the beginners like ourselves. Some scholars said an example of that in the Quran is when Prophet Ibrahim's father said to Ibrahim, أَرَاغِبٌ أَنْتَ عَنْ aalihatinaa ya Ibrahim? أَرَاغِبٌ أَنْتَ أَقَائِمٌ الزَّيْدَانِ. وَالثَّالِثَةِ, the third case, أن يكون مبتدأ ونائبا عن فاعل سد مسد الخبر, is that you would have a nominal subject, mubtada, and then you would have naib fa'il that fills the space of the predicate. Naib fa'il that fills the space of the predicate. Let me just finish reading and then I'll explain. Nahu amadrubun zaydan, like amadrubun zaydan. So it's really like the same case as what we just read. Slightly different though. Amadrubun zaydan. Naib fa'il. So naib fa'il, naib means replacement. It's like the vice doer. So look, you know this case here, inshallah. You say, for example, fa'ala zaydun, or let's say daraba. Say daraba zaydun. Okay, Zayd hit or Zayd struck. And you say, if you want to make that, as they call passive voice, this is what they would call active voice. If you wanted to make it passive voice, you'd say, Duriba. Duriba. Zaydun. Zayd was hit. So, in the first case, when you say Daraba Zaydun, an active voice, then Zayd is called Fa'il, doer. He's a doer. He's the one who did the striking. And doer here, though, means it's the subject of the sentence. Every doer of a verb is the subject of a sentence. Every doer of a verb is the subject of a sentence. Really, Arabic sentences and English sentences don't match all the way. Can have so many Arabic sentences inside of one English sentence. So, Zaydun daraba, that's a complete sentence. The doer of the verb is the subject of this sentence. He's called fa'il, doer. We're going to call him verbal subject because it's the subject of a verbal predicate. Okay, that's clear. I hope my repetition is not obnoxious. Duriba Zaydun. What did we do here? We changed the form of the verb to do what? For what goal? To change what they call the voice. Now it's passive voice. Now it means Zayd was hit. Zayd was hit. So what's Zayd? Is he still the subject of the sentence, or is he the receiver of the verb? Is he the subject of the sentence, or is he the receiver of the verb? He's the subject of the sentence who's the receiver of the verb. At the same time. When that happens, it basically means whoever did the hitting, he was taken out of the sentence, and the one who got hit slid over and took his place in the sentence. Duriba Zayd. Zayd was hit. So now he's the struck, actually. It's not the striker, he's the struck. He's the struck, but he's still the subject of the sentence. The striker is supposed to be the subject of the sentence, but now he's not. The struck became the subject of the sentence. We changed the form of the verb. So when the receiver of the verb becomes the subject of the sentence, they call that naib fa'il, replacement of the doer. The doer's replacement, or the vice doer, vice meaning replacement. Or maybe some other words you could put there. So what Ibn Hisham is telling us here is that this vice doer can also be filling the space of this vice doer can also be filling the space of a predicate, just like the doer. When we said aqa'imun zaydan, we said that's a doer. He basically took over a subject and made it his predicate. Same thing here. This is a vice doer that took over a subject and made it its predicate. Structurally, the sentence is exactly the same. According to the rules, it's exactly the same. The difference is that meaning of whether it's the doer or the receiver who took the doer's place. So, how's that? Maybe needs review, insha'Allah ta'ala. Any question? Okay. So what's going to help you here? And what's going to hold you back here? What's going to help you here is to understand the terminologies, of course. How I just went back and forth between subject and predicate and nominal and verb and verbal and doer and receiver. All these words here, I just said them all around the place, like lottery balls spinning around or something. So make sure you understand the terminology. What's going to slow you down here is going to be your lack of Arabic, and it's going to be your lack of even English terms. But no matter what, stay consistent. If something's making your brow sweat or making you a little frustrated there, that's part of the challenge there. And you keep studying and you work and you get over that hump. What's not immediately clear, you stay consistent and persistent. It will become clear, inshallah. It'll dawn on you when you're taking a walk or when you're reviewing or teaching someone. So, nobody has any comment or question. I'm going to assume that's clear. I'm going to keep going then. وَالرَّابِعَةُ أَنْ يَكُونَ اسْمَ فِعْلٍ وَفَاعِلَةٍ. The fourth case of a sentence that has no verb in it, has two nominals, is the case of what we called previously, verb noun. Verb noun, this is what we're going to call this. Ism fi'l, verb noun. Not verbal noun. Verbal noun, that's going to mean something else. Just verb noun. Ism fi'l. We talked about that before. The ism fi'l, it's an ism, but it has the meaning of a fi'l. So one would say, how you know it's not a fi'l then? Yani, when you say it has meaning of a fi'l, what does that mean? There's three types of fi'l, right? There's maldi, or mudari', or amr. So when you say it has the meaning of a fi'l, what does that mean? It means exactly that. It's going to mean a maldi verb, or a mudari' verb, or an amr, or a command verb. But it's a nominal. And then you might scratch your head and you say, so how does that work then? How do you know it's a nominal? The answer is going to be because that goes back to the identifiers. The identifiers of nominals, the identifiers of verbs. Yes, these words meant the meanings of verbs, but they found them, for example, having tanween or in other situations. So they knew that they were nominals, having meanings of verbs, though. So they called them ism fi'l, asma' al-af'al, asma' al-af'al, the verb nouns or verb nominals. So if it has the meaning of a verb, then we said as a rule, even a mental judgment, every doing needs a doer. So if a verb is a doing, fi'l, that's literally what the word fi'l means, then there should be a fa'il. So you're telling me that this is a nominal that has a fa'il, a doer? Yes, good. So here he gives the example. He says, Nahu hayhat al-aqiq. Hayhat al-aqiq. Al-aqiq. فهيهات اسم فعل وهو بمعنى بعد والعقيق فاعل به. He says, hayhat is a verb noun. It has the meaning of to go far or to be remote. And here, al-aqiq is the doer, is the subject of that nominal that has the meaning of a verb. فاعل به. So then, what's the i'rab of hayhat? Is mubtada? Or what? I don't remember. Al-aqiq is fa'il, verbal subject of the sentence. Where's its verb? It has something that's acting like a verb. Hayhat, which is a nominal. So I don't remember what's the i'rab of the sentence. He says, وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَاسْمٍ. Now concerning the sentence, the speech, yani, the kalam, being composed of a verb and a nominal, فَلَهُ suratan. It has two scenarios. إحداهما أن يكون الاسم فاعلا نحو قام زيد، والثانية أن يكون الاسم نائبا عن الفاعل نحو ضرب زيد. The first scenario is for the verb to have a doer. So that's going to be active voice, as they say. مبني للفاعل. مبني للفاعل. It means the sentence is calibrated. The sentence is calibrated for the doer. For the doer of the sentence, of the verb. Mabni here, mabni doesn't mean the same meaning as mabni there. What we talked about mabni before. This is a different mabni. Mabni here means more of a literal sense, how the verb is formed, how we put the harakas on the verb, the structure of the verb. It's mabniyun, it's calibrated. Mabniyun lil fa'il. It's calibrated for the sentence is calibrated for the doer. That means it's active voice. Daraba Zaid, or here, comma, Zaid. That's his example. Comma Zaid. Zaid stood. So that's one scenario of such a sentence in Arabic. وَالثَّانِيَةُ أَنْ يَكُونَ الْإِسْمُ نَائِبًا عَنِ الْفَاعِلِ. And the second scenario is for the nominal to be a replacement of the doer, a vice doer. Yani, for the sentence to be calibrated for the receiver. The sentence here is mabniyun lil maf'ul. Mabniyun lil maf'ul. It's calibrated for the receiver. That means now the receiver of the verb is really the subject of the sentence. That means passive voice. Nahu duriba Zaid. Zaid was struck. Subject of the sentence. While being the receiver of the verb. وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ. Got some horrendous mistakes here. ائْتِلَافُهُ. وأما ائتلافه من الجملتين, and as for speech being composed of two clauses, فله صورتان أيضا, that also has two scenarios. إحداهما جملة الشرط والجزاء, one of them, or the first of them, is the case of having a conditional clause and a consequential clause together. Yani, the condition and its consequence. Two sentences. نحو إن قام زيد قمت, such as if Zayd stood, I stood. So here, in qama Zaydun qumtu, didn't we say every time you have a verb, you have a doer of the verb, and that's its own sentence? So here, Bismillah, qama Zaydun, that's a sentence. Zayd is a doer, and qama is the act. Zayd stood. And here, qumtu, that's a sentence, because the ta is the doer, I means I, and then comma became qumtu because the ta connected. Qumtu, I stood. So that's a sentence too, on its own. That's a sentence on its own. Qumtu. So qama Zayd, that's a sentence. Zayd stood. Qumtu, I stood. Qama Zayd, Zayd stood. Qumtu, I stood. Two sentences. And we have here in, if. So this particle here has taken two sentences on. This particle came, says, قد يقال, I can handle two sentences. In comma Zaydun, give me comma Zaydun and give me qumtu. I'll take both of them. In comma Zaydun qumtu. If Zayd stood, I stood. So now, that whole thing, if Zayd stood, I stood, in English, they will call that a sentence. That's one sentence. That's called a complex sentence, that type of sentence. If Zayd stood, I stood, that's called a complex sentence. It's one sentence, not two. It's one sentence. It's composed, though, of two clauses. Two clauses. Zayd stood, I stood, those are clauses. If Zayd stood, I stood, so those two, one of them is called independent clause, and one of them is called subordinate clause, the one that can't be by itself. One can stand alone, one can't. The one that can stand alone, that's the independent clause. The one that can't stand alone, that's the subordinate clause. Those two clauses together make a complex sentence. So jumla in Arabic sometimes is going to mean clause, and sometimes it's going to mean sentence. وَالثَّانِيَةُ جُمْلَةَ الْقَسَمِ وَجَوَابُهُ, and the second scenario of two clauses that make speech together, that's the case of the swearing clause. I don't know what you might call that. Jumlatul qasam, the swearing clause, wa jawabuhu, and the response to the swear, or the subject of the swear, what's being sworn about, that clause. Nahwu ahlifu billahi la Zaydun qa'im, such as ahlifu billahi, I swear by Allah. So ahlifu, I swear, that's a verb with a doer. That's a complete sentence. But by the fact that it's swearing, then you can't stop there. So it's by itself without saying what you're swearing about, or at least implying it, like there's proof for what you're implying, then it's not informative. It doesn't promote any speech. It doesn't leave the hearer with anything. So I swear by Allah, what? The listener is still waiting. La Zaydun qa'im. Zayd is standing. Then that's the second sentence. Zaydun, la Zaydun qa'im. Zayd is standing. So that's the response, or that's what falls in response to the swear. Two clauses. Together they made kalam, speech. Let's finish this here if we can. وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ Allahu Akbar. Where's that mistake coming from there? Mistakes like that are embarrassing. That's a horrendous mistake there. وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَاسْمَيْنٍ And as for speech being composed of a verb and two nominals, فَنَحْوُ كَانَ زَيْدٌ قَائِمًا That's like this sentence, كَانَ زَيْدٌ قَائِمًا Zayd was standing. Zayd was standing. I'm not going to break that sentence down too far here. It was, though, Zaydun qa'imun. Zayd is standing or a stander. Then the verb kana came. Kana was, this verb's very powerful verb. Assimilates the whole sentence. And it's going to make this khabar over here take a fatha instead of a dhamma because it assimilated, it took over. The verb took over. So it became kana Zaydun qa'iman. Zayd was standing. When we get to that chapter, we'll see it, inshallah ta'ala. We could talk more. وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَثَلَاثَةِ أَسْمَاءٍ And as for speech being composed of a verb and three nominals, فَنَحْوُ عَلِمْتُ زَيْدًا فَاضِلًا عَلِمْتُ زَيْدًا فَاضِلًا عَلِمْتُ, I knew. Here, alima is your verb. Alima, that's your verb. Alima. Then alimtu, to that pronoun, that's your first nominal, because pronouns are nouns. I'm just going to say nominal though. I knew Zaydan, that's your second nominal. Without that second nominal, even if you just say alimtu, it's not informative yet. Zaydan, I knew Zayd, it's not yet informative. Faudilan, as meritorious. I knew Zayd as meritorious. How that's not complete, when we come to that chapter, we'll talk about it, inshallah, because of the type of verb that is. That it needs all that extra to go with it. وَأَمَّا ائْتِلَافُهُ مِنْ فِعْلٍ وَأَرْبَعَةِ أَسْمَاءٍ And as for being composed of a verb and four nominals, فَنَحْوُ That's like أَعْلَمْتُ زَيْدًا عَمْرًا فَاضِلًا It means أَعْلَمْتُ, I informed. So أعلم, that's the verb. Tu, that's your first nominal. I informed, it's not yet informative. Zayd, now for this, because of what type of verb this is, Zaydan, it's not yet informative. Amran, I informed Zayd, basically means that. In English, you can't keep going like this with all these objects here back to back. It's not going to come out in English like that. But in Arabic, you can. أعلمت زيدا عمرا فاضلا. I informed Zayd that Amr is meritorious. When we come to that, inshallah, we'll see what's going on there. Because sometimes a verb in Arabic, it needs, by virtue of its meaning, it needs an object. And sometimes it needs two objects, like gave, ata. You say, I gave Zayd. It's not complete yet. So you have to say another one. I gave Zayd money, for example. Sometimes some verbs, they need, by virtue of their meanings, an object. Sometimes they need two objects. Sometimes they need three objects. The meaning won't be complete until the verb fulfills all of what it needs. Unless there is a taqdir, something is implied, for example, or omitted. Sometimes a verb doesn't need any object, only needs a doer. It's always going to need a doer. He says, فَهَذِهِ سُوَرُ التَّأْلِيفِ. These are the scenarios of composition. وَأَقَلُّ ائْتِلَافِهِ مِنْ اسْمَيْنِ. And its minimum composition is two nominals. أو من فعل واسم, or from a verb and a nominal. كما ذكرت, just like I said. وما صرحت به من أن ذلك هو أقل ما يتألف منه الكلام. And what I have said explicitly, that this is the minimum composition of speech, هو مراد النحويين. This is what the grammarians meant when they said speech is two nominals or a verb and a nominal. They meant the minimum of it, not the extent of it. وعبارة بعضهم توهم أنه لا يكون إلا من اسمين أو من فعل واسم. And the expression of some, the way some of them say it, would give the impression that Arabic speech would not be but two nominals or a verb and a nominal. Wallahu a'lam. Allah knows best. We'll stop there. We finished that whole section too. Another one. Alhamdulillah. What did the Prophet say, alayhi salatu wassalam? If you learn an ayah from the Quran, that will be more rewardable for you than praying 100 rak'ahs of sunnah prayers. And if you learn a chapter of knowledge, that will be more rewardable for you than praying 1,000 rak'ahs. We just finished the whole chapter now. May Allah reward us. Ameen. You have any question?